Take a girl and a guy, and they fall madly in love and form a family. Sprinkle in some counseling degrees and a doctorate, a dream of transforming relationships as we know it. And 20 years later, we give you power couple Dr. Ray and Jean Ketkodian. And this is their podcast, Couples Synergy.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Couple Synergy with Dr. Ray and Jean. Hi, I'm Dr. Ray.
And I'm Jean. And this is our podcast about love, marriage, and relationships.
Please check us out online at couplesynergy.com or on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, and LinkedIn at Couple Synergy. And please subscribe to our podcast, leave us a review, or send us any suggestions on topics you'd like to hear more about. And now on to Couple Synergy, an in-depth look at love, marriage, and relationships, where we bring you our experience helping thousands of couples transform their relationships for over 25 years.
You know, everyone says you should work on your relationship, but nobody teaches us how. So we've created this podcast to teach people what they can do to create the relationship they've always dreamed of
with the partner they fell in love with. On today's episode, we're talking about conflict, and specifically about conflict. Is it instinctual to avoid conflict? And, obviously we work with couples and relationships. So we're talking about conflict within relationships, specifically with your spouse. Is it instinctual to avoid it? I don't know. I think in a way it kind of is.
I think there's a few things merged together. So I want to talk about that, but let's talk about why we think what is the instinct? Yeah.
So, if you think about, and I guess we use this example in our Mastering Synergy group, and that is that it's instinctual to run out of a burning building.
Yes.
Right. So it's danger and perceived danger and a perceived threat. It is instinctual to move away from it and to run away from it. So when we are in conflict, emotional conflict with our spouse, it is a perceived threat. It is painful, right? And so we want to move away from it and we want to avoid it.
Right. And so when we are in a place of perceived danger, whether it's physical or emotional, we're going to fight, we're going to run, we're going to freeze or hide. We are going to collapse or we're going to please.
Yeah.
And, those are our natural reactions, those instinctual reactions to danger. And so that's what we're really seeing is not that people aren't fighting.
No. People
they're avoiding the real topic.
Yeah. A lot of couples, they fight all the time.
Yeah.
Right. But I think that the fighting at that point is more defensive. It is that getting away from the danger, getting away from the threat.
Oh, so
fighting
the fight of
right.
that.
So it's like if you're, corner an animal, you're going to fight.
Right.
You're being defensive. But couples rarely go through and deal with the real reasons that are under the conflict. The pain that's under the conflict. So they don't talk about it. And in fact, what happens is naturally, because we're talking about this as instinct, is naturally over time in a relationship, they start avoiding the topics altogether.
Yeah, I'm looking up the definition of conflict. A serious disagreement or argument, typically a protracted one. What is protracted?
Protracted. Not retract, but protract, putting in front.
And it also says to be incompatible or at variance, clash. So that's the clash. Protracted, lasting for a long time or longer than expected or usual. That's what protracted means. It lasts long. And so, when we're looking at that, this is a thing that actually can lead to permanent separation and divorce of a couple when they're not dealing with those protracted. Now we learned that new word. Conflict, and they want to avoid it because it's painful and it's vulnerable. And so it's easier to fight about the toothpaste or the toilet paper roll or whatever the cliche things people fight about, which aren't very vulnerable. It's not vulnerable. It's not, there isn't a right or wrong, right? It's just a preference. And so it's easy to stay in there and think you're right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, it's easier to fight over the finer points,
Mhm.
and to debate about it than it is to talk about what it's actually attached to.
I find it really interesting that people will stay so quiet about something that hurts them so
Yeah.
deeply
Yeah.
for so long. I don't have that in me.
Yeah.
I
And
mean, you're going to know instantly, first of all, that I'm upset about something, and it won't be too long after that you know the reason why.
mhm,
And people do this for months, and they will sleep next to their partner and have sex with their partner and go to dinner and socialize with their partner and be seething, have all this boiling
right.
resentment under the surface. And oh, that's got to be so hard on people's health.
Well, when you ask them, why did you not say anything?
Hmm.
Why'd you keep it to yourselves? Well, I was afraid of the reaction.
Right.
A lot of times that's the
Yeah.
answer, right?
Which
It's
would
like,
be a danger.
I'm
right?
afraid of the reaction. I'm afraid of the repercussions of speaking my truth
Hmm.
about how I feel. And
Or
when I say that,
feeling like you don't have a right to your feelings.
exactly.
Yeah.
And when I say speaking your truth, I'm not talking about blasting people,
Right.
right? It's like, I'm angry, so I'm going to speak my truth. They're not talking about what is connected or underneath
Right.
the anger. What you were saying is the vulnerable piece of it,
Hmm.
right? And that is exactly what people are avoiding.
So if you're fighting about details and the surface stuff and trying to decide who is right or who is wrong, that is not what we are talking about. We are talking about uh, dealing with the emotions that you have about things, because it really doesn't matter what's happening on the surface. It absolutely doesn't matter. I know that sounds crazy, but what really matters is how you feel about it. And those feelings are connected to your history, because we have millions of different life situations, but a limited amount of emotion. And so those emotions attach to all these different things. And so when you feel that emotion, that is what we want to tend to and heal. And that has very little to do with what's actually happening in the moment.
Yeah. And if you are expressing your emotion and the first emotion you're expressing is anger, you got to go deeper than that. Anger is a defensive emotion.
Anger, frustration, anxiety,
Yep.
worry.
It comes in after
Mhm.
we have a more vulnerable emotion come up. It comes in to protect us from feeling that vulnerable emotion. So most couples are saying, I'm expressing my emotion. I'm pissed off and I'm angry. Well, maybe you are right now, but what's underneath that?
Yeah.
You're hurt. You're afraid.
And you can't resolve conflict with anger. You only can create
No.
more conflict.
No.
And conflict that isn't really helpful. It's, people always try to, make up rules, right? Well, if you would just, put the dishes away when I ask you to, then we wouldn't have this issue.
Mm-hmm.
And well, it's not about that. It's about what feeling comes up for you if the dishes aren't put away. And if you feel scared or something like that, well, maybe
Or
when you were a kid,
unimportant
yeah.
or disregarded, those feelings of being dismissed,
Mhm.
all of those feelings are much more vulnerable and they came from somewhere.
Right. And they happened long before you met your partner, even
Yeah.
if you've been together since you were in teenagers.
Yeah, absolutely. And, this is something that if we're talking about conflict as being instinctual,
Mhm.
that when we feel that threat and that fear of being harmed or hurt, that we are going to back off and run the opposite direction or defend, right? Or fight back.
Yep.
It is very difficult to push through that feeling to get to the place of expressing your vulnerable emotions.
Right.
That is why it is so complex when we are in a committed partnership,
Mhm.
and it's so difficult to be vulnerable, to be open with another human being that could hurt us the most.
And the only way to actually get to that place of resolution is to get out of that fight or flight response, which is part of your sympathetic nervous system, and to get into that calm place of your parasympathetic nervous system, which we've talked about this before. When you're in your fight or flight in your sympathetic nervous system, you are selfish, self-preservation. You can't think about your partner. In fact, you will come up with justifications in your head to make them even bigger monsters, to justify all that emotion you have that really wasn't part of them. That's the surface above the water of the iceberg, right?
Yep.
15% is happening now, but it's sitting on 85% of history. And this is why we teach and have a retreat for learning how to emotionally regulate, learning how to get into that calmer space so you have access to those more vulnerable emotions, because those secondary emotions are part of that sympathetic nervous system, but the primary ones are part of the parasympathetic, which is when you're calm, then you can feel the vulnerability and the hurt and the shame and the sadness and all of those things that are really tender emotions that hopefully, if you're in a safe relationship, your partner can show up and help you with that and heal some of that stuff for you. And that's, that's obviously what we teach in our 90-day program. But learning to emotionally regulate, most Americans they're in a constant state of at least anticipating some type of a threat.
Yeah, there's a high level of
Mhm.
anxiety and being on edge in
All
our
the time.
society. I should say our society, in the world
Yeah.
today. And people, if you are on edge all the time, you're primed.
Yeah.
You're primed to
Mhm.
go into that fight or flight response. It just takes a hair, just kind of a hair trigger for you to go into that defensive and aggressive and fighting back or running away type of response. And so if you think about, if you are on edge all the time, how is that playing out in your relationship? How is that playing out in your marriage? Well, it it ends up you putting up all these walls to protect yourself all the time. It results in you censoring your words and not speaking openly to your partner. It results in putting a lot of distractions into your life so that you can't connect, because if you connect with your partner, you run the risk of being hurt
And feeling those feelings
and
that are
feeling those
getting in
feelings.
the
Yeah.
way, right? So, I mean, we've all probably had this experience when we were children where some adult, our parents or a teacher, was in a bad mood and they took it out on us,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and that is when you're totally surprised that you're getting in trouble and you haven't really done anything wrong, or what you did wrong is so small. I remember this as a kid. My brother and I were playing with a balloon and we were tossing the balloon up in the air. And I had to be younger than 7 because we were in the house that we lived in, because I moved when we were 7. And my dad was trying to put carpeting in the basement.
Hmm.
So we were right above his head playing with this balloon and he just blasted us.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're just totally surprised. I mean, we were just kids playing. And that's that example where he's downstairs and all he's hearing is us banging on the ceiling above his head and he's frustrated trying to put the carpeting in. And so that's how it happens. And that's where we learn that. And that's where, like, now maybe if I saw kids playing with a balloon, it would make me nervous or something. And
Yeah.
it's that attachment that we get, and it doesn't make any sense logically, but there is a connection emotionally. And when you're in a place of fighting about the details, you're trying to make logical sense out of something that doesn't have any logic at all.
Yeah, and people try to attach logic to it. It's
Mhm.
like, if you would only have done this or said this, then I wouldn't feel this way. Well, maybe that was, the activator for you in the moment, but it's connected to something much older than that.
Yeah, it's not the landmine underneath.
Right.
Yep.
And rarely are couples actually having that kind of a conversation. Rarely. And if they do, it's not practiced enough.
Right.
Because that's what we're talking about here, is because it is instinctual to back away from that conflict. It takes practice, it takes hard work, it takes working at it together as a couple to be able to have that productive of a conversation, be able to actually talk about what it's connected to.
So here's something pretty simple you can do, and you cannot do it while you're fighting. You can't do it when you're in the sympathetic nervous system and in fight or flight, and because that'll just keep revving it up. But at a calmer time, especially if you're the person who just got blasted by your partner and you're pretty surprised at, like, what just happened? Nothing happened, and then they're very upset. And when you're in a calm place, you want to be close enough where you can touch them. Especially if you can put your hand on their back where their heart is, that's very calming. Or hold their hand, make sure you're using eye contact, and ask one of these 3 questions, or all 3 if they're appropriate. How does that hurt you? What are you afraid of? Or what are you worried about? And don't expect them to come forth with an answer instantly. Now you have to be calm, and you have to wait, and you have to let them find the answers to that. And then you're pulling that conflict down into that level where you can heal it.
Yeah, I think that the key thing that you said there is that this is not something that you're doing at the height of the conflict.
Yeah.
Right. Because rarely is your partner going to want you to hold their hand
No.
when you're in the middle of a fight. This is going to happen after things have cooled off. And, this is where you're coming back and readdressing it, which, again, a lot of couples never do. They kind of sweep it under the carpet and they never really touch it again because they're afraid of blowing up again. But it is absolutely important to come back and to process it and talk about what happened, what came up for each of you, and those 3 questions really, I guess they kind of bypass a lot of the defensiveness that initially, could come up. You don't want to have the same fight over again. So, what are you worried about? What are you afraid of? Or
Not,
how's
why
this?
does this piss you off?
Right. Or how does this hurt you? Right. That
Yeah.
gets to those vulnerable emotions right directly. And it allows the opening of the door to have that deeper conversation so that you don't take it personally as much. Right. You start to have more compassion for your partner and what your partner's going through, and also what it's connected to. You get to understand a part of your partner that existed before you even came into the picture. And when you can see that pain that they have carried with them throughout their life and are now experiencing it in your marriage, in your relationship, that's going to spark a lot of compassion within you, and you're going to want your partner to heal it so that it doesn't keep hurting them anymore.
Yeah, which is one of the goals of conflict, is to actually bring stuff up for healing and help you feel closer to your partner. And sometimes it helps to think about your partner like a child. And you would do this if you were around a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old and they had this major meltdown. The first thing you're going to want to do is help them calm down, help them emotionally regulate. And then you're going to try to get them to talk about it and figure something out. Well, the same thing is true of us as adults. That same part of us that gets activated and we have our temper tantrums, because we all do it, that's the piece where if you cannot take that personally by seeing that your partner's child is the one that's activated, something that hurt them long before they met you is what really is happening, it's easier to have that compassion and not take it personally.
So we want to thank you for joining us on Couple Synergy today. As you have noticed, we actually moved from doing lives on Monday to now live on Tuesday. And let us know, if that works better for you. And also just keep in mind that, when we are doing the lives, you feel free to ask any questions or, just say hi, because that's, we always like to see who's out there listening to us.
And if you're interested in coming on our mountaintop retreat, which is September 5th through the 8th, it is in the Denver area. It's in Estes Park in Colorado. It is on our Facebook page.
Yeah, on the Facebook page is an event invitation and explanation information for that event. And there's a direct link there to get more information about it, as well as to register for the event. And we will be covering a lot of this material, including techniques and information on how to emotionally regulate, how to deal with anxiety, how to deal with stress, how not to allow that to affect your relationship, and yourself personally. So again, we want to thank you for joining us on Couple Synergy today. Our passion is in helping couples and people have happy and healthy relationships. And this podcast gives us a fun way of bringing our knowledge and expertise to you, our listeners. For all of you listening, please let us know how you enjoyed the show. If you have any questions, comments, or topic suggestions, please email us at contact@couplessynergy.com. For more information about Couple Synergy and our programs such as Relationship 101, the home study course, the next Couples Relationship Enhancement Weekend, and our premier couples coaching program called Couple to Couple, look us up online at couplessynergy.com.
And if you know someone who could benefit from this episode, please download it and share it. And thank you for listening.
Until next time, synergize your life and synergize your love.
You have been listening to Couple Synergy with Dr. Ray and Jean Ketkodian. Couple Synergy was recorded, edited, and produced by Dr. Ray and Jean Ketkodian. Voiceover and music entitled Breathe and Let Go was recorded and composed by Gina Gonzalez.